Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take the sources and questions you send us, and well, we break them down to help you get up to speed quickly.
Get smart, fast. That's the idea.
Exactly. So today we're digging into a really interesting research paper. It's called Identifying 21st Century STEM Competencies Using Workplace Data.
Hmm. Sounds relevant.
Right. Our mission here is pretty clear. Figure out the key skills, the essential knowledge, and the actual day-to-day work activities needed to succeed in STEM fields today.
And the kicker is comparing that to current education, right? Are we actually teaching this stuff?
Precisely. The research uses this huge database from the U.S. Department of Labor data coming straight from people actually working in STEM.
So not just theory, but what people are really doing.
Yeah, and it tackles that big question. Are the frameworks we use, like, 21st century skills initiatives or engineering standards, are they really hitting the mark for the modern workplace?
It's fascinating because, this isn't just an academic exercise. The researchers are clearly responding to real worries about whether STEM education is actually keeping up.
Absolutely. Just think about the story they start with Jana, the STEM grad in a job interview.
Right.
And the questions are all about practical skills, what she can actually do. Did all those years in university actually, equip her?
It's a great little anecdote because it immediately puts you in the shoes of someone facing that potential gap.
And this gap isn't exactly news, is it? The paper mentions older studies back in the late 90s, early 2000s,
Yeah, I saw that.
already pointing out problems with things like communication, managing projects, teamwork, problem solving, critical thinking, the soft skills, kind of.
And connecting that dot, these aren't just small issues for new grads. These gaps can really drag down productivity, innovation, the whole nine yards.
For sure. And the fact that even the big educational frameworks haven't totally solved this is,
Yes.
well, it's pretty telling.
It really is. I mean, they mentioned how the ABET engineering criteria, that's a major accreditation body in the U.S.,
Yeah, very influential.
have actually been called a failure by practicing engineers. That's strong language.
It definitely is. It really highlights why this kind of research, looking at actual workplace data, is so important right now.
Which brings up the next point.
Yeah.
How do you get a good picture of what's needed? And that's where the research method gets interesting. They use the ONET database.
Okay, ONET. Let's unpack that a bit. U.S. Department of Labor database, standardized, job specific. But what makes it different from just, say, asking a bunch of CEOs what they think?
Well, the key difference, and it's a big one, is who provides the data. It's coming directly from employees doing the jobs and from professional job analysts.
Ah, so people on the ground floor.
Exactly, people living the day-to-day reality of these STEM roles. It makes the findings really grounded in what's happening right now. The database uses detailed analysis of tasks, abilities needed.
So less about assumptions of what should be important and more about what people actually do and use.
Precisely. They looked at, I think it was 109 different factors, skills, types of knowledge, work activities, a lot.
Wow, yeah.
And then they compared how important each one was for STEM jobs versus non-STEM jobs.
And how did they measure importance? Was it just a yes/no thing?
No, they use a rating scale, 1 to 5,
Yeah.
5 being extremely important.
Okay.
Then they basically drew a line, I think it was 2.95 on the scale, to see which factors fell into the high importance group versus low.
Got it. So the big reveal, what were these super important STEM competencies? What floated to the top?
Well, no huge surprise maybe, but higher order thinking skills were definitely up there. Critical thinking got a 3.81 rating.
Pretty high.
Yeah. Complex problem solving at 3.58, judgment and decision making at 3.51. It's really about that logic and reasoning, analyzing complex stuff, not just knowing facts.
Which makes total sense for STEM, right?
Mhm.
Tackling tricky problems is kind of the job description. What about those skills we always hear about, like communication?
Oh, absolutely essential. They came through loud and clear. Reading comprehension was actually super high, 3.76.
Higher than problem solving.
Interesting.
Yeah. Active listening, right behind it at 3.75. Then speaking, writing. It really hammers home that you can be brilliant technically, but if you can't understand info or share your ideas, you're stuck.
So much for the stereotype of the lone scientist who doesn't talk to anyone.
Exactly. That's just not the reality. And then there's systems thinking, understanding how things connect, analyzing systems, evaluating them, seeing the bigger picture.
Right, how the pieces fit together.
And collaboration was big too. Coordination skills, social perceptiveness, like reading the room, understanding people,
Mm,
and even instructing others.
instructing. That suggests needing to explain complex stuff clearly, maybe to non-experts even.
Could be, yeah. Teaching or mentoring roles, maybe. And then you had personal management stuff. Time management was important, learning strategies.
Learning strategies, so knowing how to learn. Yeah. Which is crucial in fields that change so fast, right?
Yeah.
You have to keep learning. And obviously the core stuff, math and science, were highly rated too. Foundational.
Can't build the house without the foundation. Okay, so that's skills. What about specific knowledge areas?
Right. Knowledge. English language is way up there again, 3.74.
Communication again?
Yep. Mathematics, obviously, very high. Computers and electronics, increasingly vital, rated 3.46.
Makes sense.
Engineering and technology knowledge, of course. But here are a couple that might surprise some people. Administration and management knowledge scored 3.03.
Really? Administration and management in STEM?
Yeah. And right alongside it, customer and personal service knowledge, also 3.03. And even education and training knowledge was considered important.
Wow. So it's not just the pure science or engineering. It's also about understanding organizations, dealing with people, maybe even teaching others.
It really paints a picture of a much more multifaceted role than maybe we sometimes imagine. It suggests many STEM pros need to navigate organizational stuff, interact effectively.
Okay, skills, knowledge. What about what they actually do all day, the work activities?
Top of the list by a fair margin, getting information. Rated 4.36.
The highest score yet.
I think so, yeah. Which makes sense. STEM is about finding things out, right? Investigation, research.
True.
Next up, making decisions and solving problems, 4.18. Interacting with computers, 4.14, a modern necessity.
No escaping screens.
Nope. And communicating with supervisors, peers, or subordinates, 4.08. Again, that communication and collaboration piece.
This just keeps coming back.
It really does. Also very important, updating and using relevant knowledge, 4.04. That continuous learning theme again.
So a lot of gathering info, processing it, talking about it, using it to solve problems, often with computers, and always learning new stuff.
That's a pretty good summary. Analyzing data, thinking creatively, organizing and planning work, those were also key activities that scored high. It shows a very dynamic kind of job.
No, one really interesting part of the paper was comparing STEM jobs to non-STEM jobs. What were the really big differences? Where did STEM stand out?
Yeah, this is where you see the truly distinctive parts of STEM work. They looked at effect sizes, basically, how big the difference in importance was.
Right, a measure of significance.
Exactly. And the schools that were significantly more important for STEM pros included science, math, programming, systems evaluation, systems analysis.
The technical core.
Definitely. Also, complex problem solving, technology design, and critical thinking showed big differences.
So it confirms that deep analytical and technical ability is really central to STEM roles compared to others.
Absolutely. And for knowledge areas, the big standouts specific to STEM were engineering and technology, math, physics, and computers and electronics. No huge shocks there, maybe.
Pretty much what you'd expect as core STEM knowledge.
Right. And in terms of activities, analyzing data, estimating quantifiable characteristics, figuring out numbers for things, interpreting information, processing information, those were all significantly more important in STEM.
It really paints that picture of analytical rigor, technical depth, and problem-solving focus being the hallmarks of STEM work. Okay, so we have this list of, 52 important factors. That's a lot to juggle. Did the researchers try to group them somehow?
They did. And this is where it gets quite insightful. They used an older framework, actually, from Katz and Kahn back in '78, but adapted it
Okay.
to sort these 52 factors into 5 main categories of STEM competencies. It helps to make sense of it all.
5 categories. What are they and what goes into each one?
All right, the first one they called ill-defined problem-solving skills. The ill-defined part is actually pretty important, as we'll probably get back to.
Yeah.
This bucket includes critical thinking, complex problem-solving, reading comprehension, math, science, active learning, analyzing info, creative thinking, kind of the core cognitive
For
skill.
the thinking skills, what's number 2?
Number 2 is social communication skills. So active listening, speaking, writing, coordinating with people, social perceptiveness, instructing, plus the knowledge areas related to language, customer service, education, basically working with people.
Thinking and interacting seems like fundamental pillars. What else?
Third is technology and engineering skills. This is monitoring systems, systems analysis, evaluation, judgment, decision-making, learning strategies, plus all that key knowledge in math, computers, engineering, and the work activities involving tech.
Working with the tech itself. Makes sense.
Fourth is interesting. System skills. This is about working within an organizational system. So time management fits here, but also that knowledge of administration and management we talked about.
Ah, so understanding the bigger organizational picture, not just the tech tasks.
Exactly. It suggests needing to get how projects fit, how budgets work, team dynamics, company processes, stuff like that. It's not just about the code or the experiment. An engineer might need to know about procurement or how marketing interacts with R&D.
That's a really key insight, often overlooked, I think. And the last one,
The fifth is time, resource, and knowledge management skills. So organizing and planning your work, scheduling, and crucially, that activity of updating and using relevant knowledge. Managing yourself and your resources effectively.
okay, so problem solving, communication, tech engineering, systems organization, and resource management.
Pretty much sums it up.
Yeah.
And they found good consistency in how they categorize these, which adds some confidence. Interestingly, the two biggest categories with the most factors were problem solving and social communication.
Which aligns with that broad demand for both smarts and people skills.
Excellent.
Now, the million-dollar question. How well do our current educational approaches, those 21st century skills frameworks, the engineering standards actually match up with these five categories?
Ah, yes. This is where the paper really throws down the gauntlet, so to speak. They found some pretty significant mismatches.
Oh, like what?
Well, looking at various 21st century skills frameworks, they often came up short on covering technology and engineering skills in sufficient depth. They also often lacked enough focus on time, resource, and knowledge management skills, and especially those system skills, understanding the organizational context.
Can you give an example? Which framework had issues?
Sure, take the National Research Council's framework. It's influential, but the paper argues it doesn't explicitly detail the tech and engineering skills to the level needed, nor does it really dig into resource management within an organization. Other frameworks they looked at, like ATC 21, B 41, had similar gaps, especially around the specific tech engineering side and those system skills.
Okay, so the general skills frameworks maybe aren't specific enough for STEM needs. What about the engineering criteria, ABET? You mentioned practicing engineers had issues there.
Right, and this research kind of backs that up. The paper found ABET criteria don't fully address that ill-defined problem-solving aspect.
The messy, real-world problems.
Exactly. They also found ABET lacking in adequately covering system skills, including that need for administration and management knowledge, and also those practical time, resource, and knowledge management skills.
But ABET talks about multidisciplinary teams, doesn't it? Doesn't that cover some of the system stuff?
It touches on teamwork, yes, but according to this research, it doesn't necessarily equip grads with a broader understanding of how the organization works, the management principles, the resource constraints that the workplace data says are important.
So these major frameworks designed to guide education seem to be missing key ingredients that people actually use on the job. Why? Any ideas why this disconnect happens?
The paper offers a few thoughts on that. A big one is that ill-defined problem thing we keep mentioning.
Right.
University courses, engineering criteria, they often focus on well-structured problems, problems with neat boundaries and usually one right answer, like a textbook problem.
Yeah, physics problems without friction.
Exactly. But workplace problems are messy, ambiguous, complex, multiple stakeholders, incomplete information, maybe several good enough solutions rather than one perfect one. The paper references Polya's problem-solving steps, saying education needs to cover the whole process, from really defining the fuzzy problem up front to evaluating the messy outcome.
That really rings true. Real challenges rarely fit in a neat box. What else is missing?
Well, the depth of technology and engineering skills. Those 21st century frameworks might mention ICT literacy or using tech tools.
General tech savviness.
Right, but this research suggests STEM needs deeper professional-level knowledge in specific engineering, science, and tech domains. And remember, engineering and tech knowledge was rated more important than basic science knowledge in many STEM jobs.
Interesting distinction. And the system skills, that organizational understanding.
That's a big gap identified. Understanding admin, management, how the organization functions, it's often just not part of the curriculum in a meaningful way, yet the data shows it's important. Practicing engineers themselves apparently report needing this to navigate regulations, internal processes, etc.
And the last one, the practical management skills.
Time, resources, knowledge management, again, may be touched upon in terms of study skills, but not necessarily taught as core professional competencies for managing projects, budgets, deadlines, and crucially, your own continuous learning within an organization.
So why are the frameworks missing this?
The researchers suggest a key reason might be how these frameworks are often created. They tend to be expert-driven based on panels, literature reviews, expert opinion,
Rather than
rather than being built directly from large-scale empirical data about what employees are actually doing and needing in the workplace right now, like the ONET data they used.
that makes a lot of sense. So if education isn't quite lining up, what's the takeaway? What should STEM programs be doing differently?
Well, the implications are pretty clear. Education needs to adapt to provide this broader competency set, going beyond just the core technical knowledge.
So what would that look like in practice? What changes could schools make?
The paper suggests a few things. First, way more emphasis on solving those messy, ill-defined problems, often in teams, maybe across disciplines. Learning experiences that feel more like real-world challenges
Less textbook, more project-based.
could be part of it, yeah. Second, integrating both quantitative and qualitative critical thinking. Not just crunching numbers, but also reasoning, evaluating arguments, considering context. Third, more opportunities for research projects, tackling real issues, perhaps even partnering with industry. For you listening, if you're thinking about a STEM career, this highlights why internships or co-op programs where you see these skills in action can be so valuable.
Getting that real-world exposure.
Exactly. Fourth, actively promoting communication skills. Not just assuming students pick it up, but structured practice in technical writing, presenting, and getting constructive feedback. Maybe peer reviews, self-assessment.
Making it an explicit learning goal.
Yes. And finally, helping students understand these competency requirements for their specific field and encouraging them to take charge of their own career development early on, making them aware of what employers are actually looking for beyond the transcript.
It really sounds like a call for a more holistic approach, acknowledging that being a successful STEM professional today involves so much more than just the science or the math.
Absolutely. It's about equipping people with the thinking, the communication, the teamwork, the organizational savvy, and the technical depth they need for these really dynamic careers. This has been incredibly insightful, really getting under the hood of what STEM success looks like now. So, a final thought maybe for you, our listener. Given all this, how can schools, companies, and even you as an individual adapt? How do we make sure STEM professionals are truly set up for success? And thinking about your own path, are there specific skills or knowledge areas from this deep dive that you might want to focus on developing further? Definitely some food for thought. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.